taking the time to be here. We appreciate everyone taking the time to be here with us today. For folks attending in person today, we have coffee and pastries over to my right, your left. And in between breaks, please feel free to help yourselves. Please also feel free to peruse the posters in the back of the room ahead of our use case showcase. Without further ado, let's get started. Today we have Dr. Gil Alterovitz, Director of the National Artificial Intelligence Institute, or NAI, for the Department of Veterans Affairs. He'll be opening with a keynote to welcome everyone and share some insights on what we will be covering during today's summit. Dr. Alterovitz has a PhD in electrical and biomedical engineering from MIT. Throughout his career at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, Dr. Alterovitz has led national and international collaborative initiatives for developing novel informatics methods and approaches for integrating clinical, pharmaceutical, and genomic information from research to point of care. As for the NAI director, Dr. Alterovitz focuses on helping the VA develop AI R&D capacity to help veterans. Dr. Alterovitz is also on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. He has produced over 50 peer-reviewed publications and 3 books in his research field. Dr. Alterovitz is one of the leading authors of the VA's AI strategy. He is one of the core authors of the National AI R&D Strategic Plan produced by the White House Office of Science Technology. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alterovitz.
Great. Hopefully everyone can hear me there and also see the screen. Great, wonderful. And so what we have here today is a great opportunity to bring people together around use cases, which is really key to our mission, essentially, right? These use cases hopefully should be reflecting our mission. And so they're really a sort of, you can think of them almost like a granular way of representing that. So if we go here to the next slide, we see that, I've been focusing over at the National Artificial Intelligence Institute on artificial intelligence, obviously, right? And we have a great team that has been looking into these different use cases, collecting them and so forth. And as you can see, there's certain use cases that are really, that can work for AI. And then there are other ones that may be suitable, but they may take time, or there may be certain considerations before you fully launch them in AI. I like this one as an example here because sometimes AI, for example, is used, it has a good use case, but it's the scope that really is the issue, right? You have to really tailor it for your needs. So if, for example, in this case, you have something around which involves voice recognition, you have to make sure that it's tailored toward your particular application. So we have a lot of medical applications. You need to make sure that it had all that medical jargon and so forth in there. So when you think about use cases, it's really important to think about a number of different aspects, including the actual data sets and the models that you may have. And so you're going to have a lot of different types of use cases that are theoretically possible, but then looking at the underlying data that you provide to the model and the actual models that are used is going to be quite important. And I'll just give you an example. In the VA, for example, the populations we serve is different than the general population, right? Where the demographics, the locations are at the different medical centers may be different than the models that are built for artificial intelligence in other locations that are built by companies, other government agencies that have different populations that they serve. And so you may have a model performing very differently given if it was trained in one data set outside the VA, for example, compared to inside the VA. And so thinking about use cases, what kind of data and models would make those use cases possible is kind of one of the key items to thinking about which use cases would be practical in a given setting. The other thing, of course, is that as much as as much as artificial intelligence, has the word intelligence in the name. If some of you may have seen this case that you can get for the phone, you have to consider kind of the human and how people will interact with the use case. So, the phone can be designed very well in this case, but if there's certain things that maybe it was not designed for, and so making sure that in your design you're thinking about the types of considerations of how that system, in this case, artificial intelligence, would interact with the human, what situations the human may take that system to, and so forth. Those are all important when you think about the use cases, again, that would be practical and that could be deployed in a given setting. And so I like this diagram because it gets you thinking about, at least within artificial intelligence, a few of the types of systems. I know they put it here in levels. I don't know if I'd put it in levels, but the fact is there are sort of different types of use cases that are available depending how you think about, in this case, the artificial intelligence types of use cases. So, association, I think, those are kind of activities. So seeing, observing, allows you to ask questions like, what if I see a particular thing, looking at associations, then taking up the next step. So actually one thing in associations, it might be, for example, diagnostics, screening, things like that. If you're looking at medical care, interventions, that is taking the next step of doing, what if you do a particular thing? What would that lead to happening? You can see here a picture of a toddler. I have a toddler at home, actually, and when you think about it, that toddler is thinking about if they move their hand a certain way, will it push something? What will happen? Those are the interventions. And then the third one in this potential hierarchy is these counterfactuals, kind of imagining and thinking backward and forward, and thinking about new ways that maybe aren't in the immediate surrounding around you, right? So rather than that direct interaction with pushing it or pulling an object, thinking about a feature that may not even exist around you right now, and if you did something, would it lead and cause something else, which would lead to a chain reaction? What if something had not occurred that you had just seen or that you had done? What if you acted differently now or in the future, and how that affected the whole system around you? And so the types of use cases and the types of technology that you use kind of depend on these, because, for example, in artificial intelligence, there are certain use cases that are, it can basically do some associations, but it may be hard to get to the counterfactual stage. So that's kind of another item there. Wanted to talk a little bit about some of the guiding documents. I'll really kind of only talk about one of these. These are some of our guiding documents around artificial intelligence, which leads to some of the use cases. But I want to just really, so we only have a couple of minutes, focus on one of these. There's an executive order. It was come with a number 13960, but it's about promoting the use and of trustworthy artificial intelligence in the federal government. And what it does is it does have this requirement around creating and enabling these use cases in a trustworthy manner across federal government agencies that are bound by this order. And so we've been working on that as well. And what I think you'll see is that this basically will create potentially a source of a data stream for activities such as the ones that you're doing around creating use case and solution libraries, right? Because this could be the data feed, for example, for some of the use cases that you're looking at. And so when we think about the value and necessity of use cases, at least in AI, AI can deliver these substantial productivity and potentially social gains. And the use cases really help us to also contextualize the AI, and to think about how it applies to the mission. In fact, the first pillar of the VA AI strategy is about using existing artificial intelligence to improve outcomes and experiences for the veterans. And so we've been looking at some of the AI use cases and evaluating them against solutions. There may be existing solutions, other new solutions that are out there. And so whenever you have a new solution where you have research and development that's done on, you want to make sure that there's going to be a potential return on that investment as well. And then I just want to include the link here to the VA site that has guidance around our different AI use cases, our strategy, as well as guidance for industry on some particular use cases. And then I want to spend a little bit of time, kind of went over a couple of these, why I think collaboration on AI is really essential, and then talk about a few considerations. So when we think about this AI research, different projects and so forth, we find it important to identify, obviously, the projects that fit to the different use cases, the research that can be done, and to facilitate, in some cases, agreements to allow for that research to move forward or to engage in collaborations. And I think collaboration is really important as you actually think about the actual use case library design potentially. So I put together, upon request, a few of these potential considerations for the National Use Case Solutions Library, and potential next steps and things to think about. And I have these in sort of the different areas. So in the design phase, there may be ways to really optimally reuse existing work. So for example, if there are existing standards, so for just as a quick example from the executive order, there's essentially a standard set of questions that are asked across the agencies, and some agencies can ask other questions as well, but there's certain fields that are typically asked about, that are so the information that's available essentially is a superset of those fields. They may be additional fields that are added. There may be fields that are not kind of included in the inventory, but essentially it is both. It is taken from those fields, and then the use of data feeds rather than copies. So if it's possible, because these inventories will keep getting updated, to take feeds from that data rather than manually, editing it, that may be a consideration or something that would be helpful to be automatically up to date. And I just give this as an example of the use cases from the federal government, but there are many other use cases out there as well that I expect that over time they'll be updated. This project really is a great opportunity to help in the building phase, to really bring people together around the build itself. And so I thought to emphasize that, because it's not only, so you want to build something, but part of it is that you can use that actual building process to bring the people together to learn about the use cases that other people are doing, about the solutions to those use cases, which I understand is a big part of this project as well, right? And so that's the building phase can kind of help in that process as well. And then the deployment. So one thing is to sort of think about it as a building ecosystem, right? So there's content, right, which is useful, but there's also the ecosystem, so that people will keep engaging with the system afterwards, offering different solutions to the different use cases, offering potentially new use cases, ways of engaging. And I've seen in the some of the early work on this, some ways that people are thinking about doing that, which is really great. And then iteration. So rather than thinking of the product is launched and that's it, there's potentially opportunities to provide new value with each iteration, whether it be better ways to do searching for the use cases and corresponding solutions or better ways of interacting among participants, think about ways to iterate. Those are some of the things that I wanted to leave you with here today as we start to, on this great conference, to bring people together, which is really already happening here in just the conference itself, as is bringing people together around building and listening to each other's viewpoints. And so kudos on that, and want to wish you all a great conference here. And if people have any other questions or any thoughts, feel free to contact us. We're looking forward to seeing ways that we can help in supporting and moving projects like this forward. So thanks very much, and I'll pass it back to Josh then.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Alterovitz, and it's a pleasure having you here with us today. So at this point, I would like to ask Dr. Jim Liu, please come on up. We're going to go ahead and get started with our first panel. So good morning again, everyone. We're excited to be here with our esteemed panel this morning. Today's panel is going to cover information sharing with emerging technologies across government. We're fortunate to have Dr. Liu here with us in person. And we're also honored to have Dr. Christos Makridis and Dr. Amanda Purnell here with us virtually. So Dr. Jim Liu is the president of SOCAT, Associate Professor of Finance at Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. Dr. Christos Makridis is the Senior Advisor to the National Artificial Intelligence Institute at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And Dr. Amanda Purnell is the Director of Data and Analytics Innovation, the Office of Healthcare Innovation and Learning at the Department of Veterans Affairs. My name is Joshua Hakakian, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Christos, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Excellent. And Dr. Purnell, can you hear me as well?
Yes, it's going through to both of our screens.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so Christos, my first question is for you. When it comes to emerging technologies, there's an argument that the market is still being built when it comes to the government technology space and recent federal agencies. Now, in alignment with Executive Order 13960, published artificial intelligence use cases, and they were shared across government. With this now public information, how are agencies using artificial intelligence from an economic perspective? How have new inventions and ideas historically been adopted by government agencies? And what sort of economic argument can be made for accelerating the adoption of emerging technologies, such as AI, in the government space?
Thank you, Josh. And let me just start by saying thank you for everybody that's listening and that's in the room. This is a wonderful conference, and I'm so excited to be part of it. I'll answer the second part of the question first around kind of the evolution that we've been between public and private sector, and then come back to the first. So traditionally, I mean, if we go back 50 years, post-World War II, the United States federal government worked really closely with a lot of social scientists. The RAND Corporation had a really big impact on developing new strategies, technologies, ranging from operations research to economic strategies. And there was that close relationship. Unfortunately, over the past 3 decades or so, there's been a little bit more tribalism within academia that has led to this disconnect between what academics are oftentimes focused on and then what actually matters for national security, for industrial policy, et cetera. And that's one of the reasons why this use case summit is so important, is because it helps create extra structure and additional signals to academics, to researchers around what to be focused on, how to engage with the federal government. Because oftentimes the kind of complaint or the excuse that I'll hear from fellow faculty in universities is, yeah, it's just so difficult to engage the government, it's not worth the time, blah, blah, blah. And it's totally valid that there's a lot of investment that's required on both sides. But what's beautiful here is that now this is an additional outreach effort to researchers and to the academic community to invite them into these conversations. Now, I'll kind of make one last point around the importance of this linkage. In economics, there's a concept called externalities. This is when there's a third party that is affected, but it's not usually priced in the initial bilateral transaction that happens. And so national security, industrial policy are often referred to as positive externalities because we are beneficiaries of that broader enterprise that exists. Even though we're not directly necessarily contributing it. Yes, we contribute through our taxpayer money, but it's a broader positive externality that emerges for the nation. And one of the beauties of a lot of the federal investments that have been made is that they have these dual use applications. So somebody in the federal government comes up with something because they have a very specific need, but then the benefits ultimately spill over to individuals, average individuals, companies, and so on. And a fantastic example of that is just what we see with Google Maps and how AI that has been invested at a federal level, all the internet infrastructure that's been built out, now that forms the basis of so many of our day-to-day services. So with that, I'll just kind of conclude those initial remarks just by saying, I think social scientists at large have a very important role to play working with people in the federal government. And the way that we do that is by focusing on extremely specific pain points and then coming up with solutions. It's easy sometimes just to focus on the theory, but until you get involved in specific issues, it's hard to build a coalition around it. So it's great to see the use cases coming out, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Hey, thank you, Dr. McCritis. Dr. Purnell, my next question is for you. As these technologies take hold and agencies adapt to identify, procure, pilot, and scale different emerging technologies, there are a lot of questions around cost, sustainment, as well as risk and oversight. When it comes to not only adopting emerging technologies, but continuing to drive innovation across an agency enabled by these technologies, how can agencies best prepare for the different ways emerging technologies will impact employees, organizations, and the greater American public?
Well, good morning, everyone. First of all, I really wish that I could be in the room with you, and want to thank you so much for your kind invitation to speak with you virtually this morning. That is an action-packed question, so I will do my best to answer what I can speak to from my experience at the VHA. So I've been with the VHA for about 13 years. And I really appreciate it. Actually, I'm going to track back to some of Dr. Alterowitz's comments. When we're thinking about emerging technologies, we always have to think about who are the people who are going to make use of this? How do they perceive a problem, if anything? And how might they make use of that technology? Historically, the VA is not unique here. Other government agencies are the same. They're big organizations. It's very easy for efforts that are happening in one part of an organization to be opaque to another part of the organization. So we have the whole left hand, right hand problem. You may have different entities working on the same problem at the same time, spending government money or spending private money. It happens in private entities as well. And so I'm really inspired by this opportunity here to be transparent and open. I think there's a shift in how we as a government think about the collective good. And that means that we learn from and with each other. So by developing these open, transparent networks of information that allow us to share what we're trying to do, what we're learning along the way, and how we're making use of various technologies, this can really expand and support other people who are wanting to do the same thing. So my office is very practically oriented. I'm housed within VHA, and we're an operational arm. So our goal is to test out new ideas. Over the course of the past few years, we've been building out what we are now calling a data and analytics registry. This is a fairly simple tool that allows for people to self-discover, hey, I want to learn, or I want to solve a problem in, say, care management for diabetes. Is someone else doing the same thing already? And could I learn with them? Or are they solving a slightly different part of the problem and we can collaborate and work together? So there's no shortage of problems. What there is a shortage of is kind of networks of people so that we can learn together. Historically, people have kind of been very targeted in their efforts. I think this opportunity here that I'm really excited about is a chance to learn with and from one another, and breaking down our concerns about intellectual property or something like that. You know, as a government entity, our goal is to help people. We're public good people. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity. And I think creating registries, creating use case libraries, creating shareable tools that allow for collaboration, I'm just really encouraged by this effort. And I look forward to continuing to work with all of you on this. I'll pause there.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Pinnell. And we look forward to continuing to work with you as well. Dr. Liu, my friend.
Josh, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good morning.
Thank you for being able to make it today. Good morning. So Dr. Liu, my question for you is, going back to adoption and scaling, oftentimes government technology leaders have questions around when an emerging technology has reached maturity. As agencies adopt and adapt to institute emerging technologies across their enterprises, what emerging technologies do you see being prioritized in both the commercial and government sectors? And what benefits are organizations realizing by adopting these technologies?
Thank you for that question. I'd like to first thank ACT-IAC. You know, this is one of the most amazing organizations that brings industry and government together to collaborate. So that's great. And that's how we started. And I got to meet Josh and, you know, watch him propel his career. For me, you know, it's about the people. And I think it was talked about a couple of times. It's all about the people. We have the technology, and if we coordinate across the different divisions, which is the Ivory Tower, Johns Hopkins, the government agency, you guys have all the rich data and you have all the SMEs available, and then we work with industry. The only partner that I also want to bring into the conversation are the investors. I'm a finance professor, so I can talk about investment and money and venture capitalists. I think that's the other component that we need to bring in here. And so now, you know, we're trying to be leaders in AI, and we're trying to push forward emerging technology. And if you look at every great nation, the way that it becomes great is embracing emerging technology, entrepreneurship, and working together across these different divisions. Ivory Tower people are a little bit scared of govies because they don't know what you guys are doing, and so you got to build that bridge. And, you know, Todd is here. There's many people here. Fred is back there. You know, Soraya is over here. She's just an amazing sort of force that can pull these people together. So from my perspective, I know this is about AI, but I think it's very important that we all give ourselves a little bit of room to, you know, work with AI, see what works on the commercial side, try to bring that into government. You know, some of the things that seem to work well are chatbots and dashboards and so forth, and internal risk measures. We start that. The other thing that I just want to sort of stress is that we're teaching this to the MBA students now. So the MBA students at Johns Hopkins are learning how to program in R, in Python. They're learning how to sort of set up machine learning pipelines. So we're training the next sort of generation of business students. And remember, the business students probably are not as tech savvy as the computer science students and the engineers. So it's sort of become mainstream, at least, you know, from my perspective. I've been at Johns Hopkins for about 10 years teaching, and I teach the big data machine learning course. So, you know, that's where we stand right now.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Liu. I saw Dr. Pinnell drop something in chat. Dr. Pinnell, what about Dr. Liu's answer struck you? And would you like to come off mute and discuss any points that he made that you feel resonated?
I wish I could be in the room with you again, Dr. Liu. It was so great to see you at the Brain Summit. To me, it does come down to people. People can artificially divorce artificial intelligence or technology from the people who develop them. And it's about having the courage to get to know people who are in other industries, who are in other settings, who have different perspectives. And for me, this relates also to the importance of an equity lens, on purpose reaching out to people who have different perspectives, who see problems from a slightly different viewpoint or vantage point based on their experience and background. And it's those relationships that seem to me to be absolutely essential to catalyzing solutions. So a technology can be profoundly impactful, but if people can't work together to implement it, it's useless. So it's really about getting people together who are determined to overcome the inevitable obstacles that will be part of the delightful journey of testing something out. It's the relationships that get you through those bumps in the road.
I just want to add a plug for Dr. Purnell. She throws this amazing event every Friday where she pulls together, clinicians, data scientists, and they share their results or, their research in a really nice setting where they're, she's trying to connect dots. And so she's doing an amazing job in the VA. And I think, Gil also just through the Brain Summit, that was an amazing event where we pulled together all these wonderful people across the different industries and hospitals and government and so forth. And also the younger generation. There was actually high school students there that were working with the VA. So, we have to sort of think about the whole ecosystem. I think the talent actually is all around DC, but we got to give everybody an opportunity to participate. You don't need to graduate from, an Ivy League school or, Hopkins Business School in order to do AI. We got to find the talent. We got to nurture that talent. We got to be sort of, patient as people develop their skill. But we have to give them an opportunity to do that. And then we have to provide all the many, many jobs that are available for data scientists, data engineers across government so that they can improve their lives. So, I think what's fascinating about AI is if you step back and think about it, the United States has led it. We've trained everybody who's an adversary inside the United States, whether that's at Silicon Valley or the Ivory Tower, and it's ours to sort of lose the lead. And it's coordinating people. That's all it is. Now, you have to definitely throw capital. So, I would encourage, I think, both, what Dr. Vega does and Dr. Gil Alchovitz at the NIE, they're kind of missing a zero at the end of their budgets. And that's how seriously we have to think about trying to stay in the leadership position. And that's how serious we should take AI versus our adversaries. I'll stop there.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Liu. So, we've seen that sort of initiative over the past few years from the White House, from the VA. We've seen, requests like RFIs come out for the Federal Register about, seeking additional emerging technologies to continue to explore. And both you and Dr. Purnell had said something that resonated with me personally at the VA, and I think maybe also resonated with Dr. McCrittis. So I'm going to give him an opportunity to speak to it. So Christos worked and has been working closely with one of our interns who is, very young, and they've been doing some collaborations. Christos, I want to give you an opportunity to speak on that if you wish to. And I also wanted to ask you, given the different kinds of statements about the importance of sharing this with the public and about how we are here to serve in our specific capacities, veterans and their families, but the American citizenry as a whole, what sort of barriers have you been working to overcome, or what sort of policies have you been looking to implement to further our, one mission that's dear to us, which is trustworthy AI, but also to, build this repertoire of emerging technology that's safe for the American public?
Great question. So I think both Jim and Amanda have kind of hit the nail on the head that it's about people and the importance of coordination. As organizations get bigger, it's more difficult to coordinate. It's not, you probably don't need an economist to necessarily to say that, but coordination becomes more challenging. And as a result, you need new processes for bringing people together, which requires, I mean, just time, and requires thoughtfulness around what are the different barriers that lead to these knowledge silos sometimes. And so one of the things that we're trying to do very actively within NI is bring together these different types of stakeholders, whether it's a faculty or whether it's an intern, whether it's a company, whether it's another agency, and to really focus on concrete problems. And so the example with Josh is at University of Virginia is great, because he is interested in data scientists. He's actually really interested in kind of sports analytics and has been applying data science to kind of study sports trends. But he's also just kind of actively interested in applying his knowledge in areas of medical informatics and public health. And so we've been working with some panel data from Gallup and looking at how veterans relative to non-veterans have fared over the past 2 years, what explains differences in people's evolution of beliefs and how they've actually been feeling. And and what's great about Josh is, and I think a lot of interns, is that there is that excitement, this novelty. And I think some of us, I mean, we all are sometimes tempted to kind of lose the excitement that was maybe there early on. And so we have to push ourselves, remind us, like, this is really, it is fascinating work, it's important work, and that we need to be bringing that full awe of, wow, we get the opportunity to work on these complex problems and serve the public and connect the dots. And that's a really important responsibility not to take lightly. And so lastly, just around how to really kind of elevate the kind of role of research in public service, is to maintain this constant feedback loop between the researchers and the social scientists and the computer scientists that are building algorithms, and then ensuring that the algorithms that are being built are actually solving relevant problems, that they're being validated, that they're being disseminated and being prototyped and tested. Because otherwise what ends up happening is somebody creates this kind of like beautiful solution in theory that has very little real world value. And so that's what it's important about what we're doing here today, and obviously what Amanda's work is doing, and actually operationalizing ideas and testing ideas out in the way that we get to work with faculty to come up with new ideas. So it really is an ecosystem that requires each person kind of bringing their A game every day.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCurtis. I appreciate that answer. So at this point, I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today, present, particularly, those of you who could make it, but also those of you who have some obligations which prevent you from being here. Just, we thank you for your participation, and we look very much forward to continuing to work with you in the future. So please give me a round of applause for these panelists. Thank you very much. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Dan. Dan's going to come up. Dan is our MC for today.
Thank you, Josh. Josh is being nice about it. I'm more or less the glorified Vanna White participant today, so thank you all. And just to echo what Josh said, thank you all very much to our panelists. That was a very insightful, very, very helpful panel we just went through. And additionally, just to introduce myself, for those of you who I have not met in person, my name is Dan Byrne. I'm a KPMG employee helping out with these ACT-IAC events. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you all today. Additionally, just one side note, I'm actually just to attest to one of the things that Dr. Liu said earlier about the Johns Hopkins MBA program, where I'm currently a student in. I am, yeah. I signed up to be an MBA student. Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. So yeah, right. So like I said, this actually semester, one of my first class actually was involved with programming, and I actually was considering maybe not I'm just kidding. Anyways. But anyways, I digress. But thank you all very much for your attendance. We're actually going to jump into just a quick 15-minute break right now. So at this time, please feel free to help yourself to any refreshments with the coffee, the donuts. And also, even though we do have time set aside at the very end to look at the posters, please feel free to also take a glance at those and see what we have to offer in the future as well. So thank you all.
Good morning, everyone. We're excited to be here with our esteemed panel this morning. Today's panel will cover emerging technology use cases, how federal agencies are paving the way. I'd like to take a moment to introduce each of our panelists. Today, we have with us Sanya Basarik, the Artificial Intelligence Program Lead for the Department of Health and Human Services, Neil Chowdhury, Director of Federal AI Implementations for the General Services Administration, and Polly Hall, Senior Advisor to the Chief Procurement Officer for the Department of Homeland Security. And my name is Jackie French, and I will be your moderator for today's panel. Thank you all for being here with us, and let's kick off. So over the summer, in alignment with Executive Order 13960, agencies across the government publicly published artificial intelligence use cases. And with sharing this information, interagency collaboration has become a point of focus when it comes to adoption and scaling of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. For identifying and sharing of use cases, how are use cases helping to inform adoption and scaling? And how can these efforts help inform use case sharing initiatives across the federal agencies? Neil, let's start with you.
Thank you so much for that question. It's something that I know I have been involved with in my official capacity in helping scale up AI efforts across government, and also in my capacity as, engaging with industry, which is also part of my official mandate. And the idea is, when we have such limited resources, and, for government, sometimes it's not just money and dollars, it's also time. When we have such limited resources, it makes no sense to try to recreate the wheel. What we have to do is start with the known universe before we go exploring the unknown universe. So in that sense, there are a lot of great initiatives across government that are building upon best practices from industry. So when you look at industry and the way, agile development and application works, is you'll have a company that puts out a feature in a product, and then it's immediately copied by everybody else. It's just iterative, and that just works wonderful. And then there's feature parity across, what we do. And in government, that's sort of the same idea, because when you look at, the federal processes, there's also, when we look at how federal budgets are developed and resources are allocated, we talk about the functions of government, and there's, public security, there's like national security, there's health, there's 16 functions in government. And what we are trying to do and what we're getting much better at is when you have these functional similarities, regardless of agency, for example, HUD does loan guarantees. VA does loan guarantees. USDA does loan guarantees. So they have parametrically similar processes, even though their authorities might be different. So, if there's an agency or a department that has a new application and, a new way of improving that customer experience, leveraging emerging technologies, leveraging AI to help deliver services better, it just makes sense for other agencies, instead of starting from scratch, to be able to replicate it. And then the other idea is that, as we get very complex with our ecosystems, I used to talk about a couple of years ago, people, process and technology. Now I talk about people, process, and platforms, because everything is no longer independent technologies. It's all platform driven. And these platforms are so complex that, if we're not using proven products, we really run into the risk of, just a cyber threat, or even making really poor decisions when it comes to building algorithmic models that, instead of decreasing bias, they actually increase structural inequities. So it just makes so much sense from a government perspective that the first sort of check in the box when you're thinking about a new product or executing a new mandate from Congress, to say, who else in government has done something parametrically similar? And that's really the idea we go with. And they're, and it's not just government only. It's this idea about asking your industry partners, because sometimes in government you get these silos, inadvertent silos, that your industry partners can come and say, hey, I did this for agency X. It's pretty similar to what you're asking, and I can do it for you. And it really cuts down on where we are with, flash to bang, sort of the old military adage. It's just the time to execute. You shorten it from 18 months of discovery to about 90 days of discovery, and you can immediately start implementation. So there are lots of advantages just to sharing use cases, recognizing that each agency has their own statutory autonomy and budgetary autonomy. So it's not like telling every agency you need to do it X, Y, and Z, being prescriptive about it, but being able to say these are cases, use cases, and solutions that have been proven to work in the federal sector in a risk-free way, and that's where you need to start with instead of from scratch. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Those are really critical points when it comes to platforms and points of authority. And I know that there's been a lot of great work done on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security and with emerging technology use cases when it comes to experimentation and innovation with federal acquisition techniques. As agencies begin to share more use cases covering emerging technologies, what approaches, frameworks, or tools should agencies consider for testing new ideas, sharing lessons learned, and promoting best practices? So Polly, it'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much. This is I could go on and on because this is my jam. This is where we really do make a difference by working together. And I think, when the EO came out, we were really excited, but it wasn't as transformational for us at Homeland because we already had the framework in place to bring use cases, right, and successes to bear so that others might learn, so that we do bring down those walls, promote the transparency and the collaboration and the sharing. And that is with our Procurement Innovation Lab, right? So stood up in 2016. Our framework for that is so pertinent to the topic of today, which is testing and sharing. And I think some key fundamental areas of the framework that we've tested out now in multiple emerging technology capacities specific to the procurement line of business are really well aligned to what Gil shared earlier, right? This concept of design, build, deploy, and iterate, right? The first part about design is through the PIL framework, through that lens, we connect with actual users, right? So for our emerging tech capability, we're not starting with the technology or the platform, right? We're starting with the people. And so listening to what our workforce needed, right, to help them do their job better, but also to help them do their job faster, right? Better first, faster, great, is understanding where there might be potential areas to explore capabilities around AI. For instance, one of those areas that came out in those conversations with our users, right, with our workforce, was around our past performance evaluations for source selection and using the data that the government has already invested time to collect that's in our Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System, or CPARS. And so, when we think about the design phase that Gil shared earlier, right, designing for users, right, designing with our users. So we didn't just hear them and then go out and build a solution for them. We brought them to the table, right? So we used existing frameworks, right? Our Chief Acquisition Officers Council, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, and our acquisition communities across the federal agencies, right? We brought those stakeholders together, shared what we heard from our workforce, and decided that we would together undertake the design to build the capability to leverage emerging technology to improve our past performance evaluations for source selection. So we didn't just build for the folks, we actually brought a user group representing over 10 federal agencies together from day one to work with our vendors to build the solutions for themselves. And I think that's a really key part. We can't always do that. And you don't want to have too many users that our vendors get confusing information. Having somebody drive those discovery sections, those agile iterative reviews with your users is really important, because we want to keep our requirements clear. And lots of users have lots of different perspectives, but what is the consensus? Where can those users meet in the middle to get a tool that works for all of them? And so thinking about your design process of how you're going to work with your users, I think, is a key framework there. Another key framework is designing, and I use this word intentionally, designing with the end in mind, because it's not just about building a solution with the end in mind. To get to what Gil talked about with that deploy to an ecosystem, you have to design with the end in mind. We knew a few things about creating new capability around our past performance system. We didn't want to end with a single vendor. We wanted to create an ecosystem that was a multi-vendor competitive commercial environment in our end phase. And so we designed our phases, our approach, to build with that in mind. It wasn't just the technology, it was the commercial marketplace we were trying to create around these new capabilities for our federal acquisition workforce. And so we really have to think strategically as we start out on these use cases. First, learning about the known universe, right, what's already out there, but also knowing where you need to end up so that you can build intentionally to get there, right? I remember early on in our journey for these CPAR solutions, I went to our CIO because we were, working through in partnership with our IT folks, and I said, okay, we're going to award multiple. Remember this conversation? Sorry, I want to award 9 contracts for these proof of concepts and prototypes. And he's like, why do I need 9? I was like, because they're not all going to be successful, right? And at the end of the day, I don't just want to end up with one. We need to have competition, right? We need to make sure that prices stay, appropriate, that quality stays up, that the vendors are incentivized to create additional capabilities after we go to production. And, it took a while because he's like, but I feel like we're buying redundant. They're not redundant, right? And so we had to explain all of this, but we got the buy-in we needed. We awarded 9 initial solution or prototype, proof of concept and prototype contracts, right? We leveraged our commercial solutions opening pilot program authority because that gave us some flexibility to co-build with industry these new capabilities on the best platforms, right? So that we could end up where we are today, which is we went through proof of concept, we validated the capability, we went through initial prototyping, again, validated the capability, and then we're now in a phase where we're ready to operationally test the prototypes. To do that, we need to buy the initial prototypes, right, the beta solutions. And now we're putting a government-wide contract in place, still using CSOP authority, but to make sure that all of the agencies that built these can easily access the licenses to go through an operational test with us in a real phase. This is not for CPAR, so folks don't get worried. We're still working through our regulatory changes there. These are related to some market research capabilities that eventually over time we hope to integrate into a larger solution. So I think the key there, and hopefully what I kind of got across, was focusing on that design, build, deploy, iterate model, thinking about the ecosystem we want to create, working with the users that all will be impacted so that we are building once for all, because one thing we know, resources and money, right? Time and money are hard, and we don't want to burden our industry as much as we don't want to burden our government community. And so really bringing stakeholders together and envisioning what you can do together is huge. It's why we love the EO. It's why we love events like this today. And really, truly, I think it's a fundamental reason why this testing and sharing framework that started back in 2016 with the PIL framework has been such a great tool to leverage for these types of capabilities.
Thank you, Polly. You started with some keywords, better and faster, and using existing frameworks, finding those coalitions and bringing them together, we can help enforce a competitive commercial marketplace. And there's been a lot of talk about how to shorten time to award. Tanya, this is an area of interest throughout the conversations we've been having across ACT-IAC. What are your thoughts on how the sharing of use cases helps shorten time to award?
Jackie. I'm Sonia, and I love Executive Order 13960. I just really do. Look, for a department as massive and as federated as HHS, we really needed a federal mandate like that to spark a lot of department-wide efforts that I'm really proud of, and it's a really, really exciting time. I think in a few years, we'll look back and we'll see this executive order as a key catalyst that really accelerated the adoption and scaling of AI across HHS. Our folks are really interested in what else is going on, right? What else is happening across the department, in other agencies, and then also within industry, right? I think people want to know where they fit in to the ecosystem and confirmation that they are in fact part of this ecosystem, right? We have been using these use cases to start to analyze the landscape of AI at HHS, right? We're looking at which divisions are really leading the charge in terms of number of AI projects deployed. We're looking at what tools are commonly used, which techniques are most common. Is it chatbots? Is it NLP? And we are then giving folks the opportunity to communicate with each other. And that's key also, right? A team that is deploying a chatbot using a specific platform should know that there was another office that successfully did the same thing and probably ran into some of the same challenges, right? So that communication can save so much time and so much money, and also set precedent for the approval process, right, to actually deploy an AI project. My office is in a really unique position because we sit within the office of the CIO to foster those kinds of communications within HHS. And we are leveraging these use cases really as much as we can. Thinking about how it can shorten time to award, I think the short answer is technology-driven acquisition policy and reform, right? We look at frameworks like the PIL or like DoD's Tradewind, right? This managed service program that has simplified the acquisition process for AI tools, services, products, technologies by creating this lean operating model. And they have, I think, a $4 billion OTA funding vehicle. They have their own marketplace where DoD can announce and manage AI opportunities for industry, right? These kinds of programs did not just come out of thin air, right? These departments said, look, we are doing AI right now, and it's a need. And if we want to continue to lead, like Dr. Liu said, continue to lead in AI, we can't rely on those old school, long runway federal contracting mechanisms. We have to do something quicker. So I think that I keep referring to these use cases as like the starting point and this spark, because I really think it is a spark for reforming acquisition, and I'm so excited to see what we do with it.
Absolutely, and we've heard that thread there of it being a spark across the conversations today with the different panels, and that actually segues nicely to my next question, which I'd like to open up to the greater panel. How can agencies work together to foster adoption of emerging technologies, as well as institutionalize the newfound lessons learned and best practices as we begin to share more use cases? Polly, you mentioned the operationalization of things. Neil, you're speaking to platforms. Sonia, you're speaking to the different mechanisms for how we can reach the federal procurement pieces there. What can agencies do to help drive this institutionalization and adoption of use cases or of emerging technologies?
So, this is, I'm in a very interesting space right now for the last 2 years, because I was pretty much a technology program manager before that, and now I'm in technology transformation services, that's housed in GSA, and it's this very interesting space because you're not just focusing on one-off, fixing technology one-off. You're really working on fixing structural problems, right, or structural issues, especially as it relates to emerging technology. And one of the biggest challenges that I've been struggling with, and I know a lot of my peers struggle with, is, and then this is why use cases and solutions libraries are so important, is how do we on-ramp small businesses that, may be marginalized or underutilized. And it's not just, the traditional categories. The way the examples I also give are, this really small company in Shreveport, or, in Portland, Maine, or, somewhere out in, Michigan or Minnesota that don't have the access that companies in Northern Virginia do. How do we get these companies to on-ramp with their solutions? And that's where a use case and solutions library is critical, because if we don't even know they have a proven solution, how do we even recruit them to come work for the federal government? How do we leverage programs, great programs, for example, in, GSA, in Federal Acquisition Service, like Fastlane and Springboard, where we help smalls become mids? How do we build that ecosystem if we don't even know they exist and that they can successfully execute? So, use case and solutions libraries are really that great equalizer in bringing competent, companies across United States and leveling the playing field, because, in the digital ecosystem, we don't need somebody else to be a hyperscale cloud provider. There's no way, there's nobody out there that's going to be able to invest, very few, right? Nation state types, $200 billion in CapEx to stand up, resilient data centers. So it's how do we leverage the cloud to help small businesses equitably participate in the federal workspace? And the use case solutions libraries are a great way, because now we know they exist. When we search for that unique problem statement that we have and 5 companies come up, it shortens our, so we're not going back to the same well over and over again and saying, give me your suboptimal solution. We can actually target a small company that can provide us that very optimal solution that we're looking for in that place and time. So use case and solutions libraries, sharing, the federated sharing without giving up autonomy and authority, it's the best of both worlds. And it's something that I've been really passionate about in these past couple of years. Thank you.
I mean, when you think about the capability to help companies grow, right? They might have local government or state government capability that they've developed that we would not hear about if not for the networks that we're growing, right, across government and through these use case compilations. And that's, I think, where we really want to lean in and draw upon our industry associations, our academic universities, to help make sure that those examples are coming up through different engagement structures to help us build that capability. So, I mean, spot on. It's the art of the possible here is really phenomenal, and now it's the time to do. And so I think that's key. Simplifying acquisition process, shortening time to award. I think one of the things we want to think about as we go in that area is understanding our full suite of procurement authorities and then leveraging them and making sure we're building in capability to scale and grow what we procure. And that has to include, right, making it easy for new partners to come into the mix, right? And so how do we create vehicles that bring us what we need expediently, but not so fast that it's not what we should be buying, right? So fast and optimal. You have to be careful there. It's a balance. But the key is that have guardrails in play that. Not guardrails, but walls that are low enough for others to jump over at the right time, right? The right gates along the way. And so, procurement is a craft. It's sitting at the table with our procurement teams, with our CIOs, with our program owners and our users, and figuring out what we are trying to accomplish and then building it together.
Absolutely. So federated sharing, right? The use case library. I think whenever you're in any sort of tech role in the government, it's this constant push-pull, right? I'm trying to lower the barrier of entry to AI projects at the department. At the same time, I need folks to do trustworthy AI, right, and follow ethical principles. And so, we need to build these national libraries, and we need, these repositories. At the same time, it's a fine dance, because we don't want to burden people, right, with extra things. I don't want to say, well, thank you for submitting your use case to me, but now here are 10 other things I need you to do with it, right? And so we have to find that balance in order to get everybody on board and to get that full stakeholder engagement.
Absolutely. So this has been a great discussion. We're coming up on time, so I'd like to open a final question to the panel. What advice can you share for identifying and gathering emerging technology use cases going forward?
Don't assume that what you're building is the first time anybody's thought of it. I mean, I really think that you know, start with the who else might have, right? And then it's building on the network, right? We've got use case libraries now. We have the periodic table of acquisition innovation, which is moving out through a great ACT-IAC partnership of layering our emerging tech capability into that procurement innovation resource table. So you know, use your councils, right? Use your network to learn about, right? We went to our budget office the other day with a need for a tool that included automation and potentially AI, but at least automation. And, you know, we didn't want to build it because it was a budget process that we were trying to support, right? And it wasn't unique to us. And in fact, it wasn't unique to DHS. And so my question for them is, has any other OCFO across the government developed something similar to what we're asking for? And of course they didn't know, but that's where we're starting with is, you know, who else? And so, you know, ask those questions first. Make sure you build time in to do that networking and research that you need to do as you start.
I would say, you know, at this point, we shouldn't be waiting for another executive order to do things, right? We're going to have another data call. Let's not wait until we have to submit things for us to gather information within our own agencies, right? You know, build that communication within your own department and agencies. Use those communities of practice, those councils, to foster that type of communication.
You know, my closing thought is, you know, it goes back to exactly, you know, what Polly and Sonia have been talking about is, you know, this idea of your craft. You know, like Polly's craft is acquisition. And, you know, there are folks related in that field that work on their craft that are very good at it. You know, in Sonia's case, it's AI experts that are doing wonderful things, that are working on their craft. And the challenge that I always face is, you know, we're in the government. We recognize that there's compliance, right? And then there's what I call necessary compliance, and then the compliance burden. So you say, how do you figure out what is that necessary compliance to reduce that compliance burden? And sometimes the only way to sort of figure that piece out is ask, has somebody else done this? And how did you walk through your compliance process? You know, and they might be, oh, we did this, and this. And you're like, wow, okay, that's very smart. You just made me, I can skip 7 steps, or I know exactly how to fill out this form correctly, so I'm not struggling back and forth filling out a form for 4 months because somebody else has already filled it out and they know, don't check that box, that's going to get you in trouble, you know, or you need to figure out. And, you know, and even when I worked on projects before, developing projects, the first people, and people look at me like crazy, the privacy experts. I would bring in the privacy experts. They were my best friends. And people would be like, why are you doing that, Neil? And I would say, if I can't explain it to them now, there's something fundamentally wrong with my project. And my project you know, taking that approach, it shortened the project time, because traditionally what you do is you develop your project and you give it to the privacy folks, and then you're complaining it's taking a year for my project to get, because you know what, the lawyers and the privacy guys are holding me up. No, they're not holding you up. They're doing their job. If you had engaged them earlier in the process, you know, they would be your best friends, and they would actually tell me, this is how somebody else did it. This is an example of the form that you need to fill out. And you're like, wow. And that's exactly, you know, the use case and solutions libraries is you take what somebody else has done and you learn not from a theoretical, but you learn from their experience. And that's the best way to shorten time, because you're not putting your hand in fire just to say, ow, it hurts. You have learned from somebody's experience. And that's the last thing, that's what I'd like to say is it's about leveraging everybody else's experience to learn, not to, and to get better. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We appreciate your time and participation in today's panel. And that will wrap our final panel for today. We are now moving to our use case presentations. Thank you, Sonia, Polly, Neil, really appreciate it. Coming back to you guys. Thank you.
Sonia, Neil, and Polly. Fantastic panel, and it was really great to have you all. At this time, we're going to go into our last final break before we enter into our use case showcase, and that's going to be covering keeping humans in the loop, emerging technology that enables people, teams, and policy. So like I said, as before, please go treat yourself to refreshments. Please go ahead and examine some of our posters you have in the back. I just ask you all to be seated and ready again at 10:45. So thank you again. We'll give you a 5-minute warning. Production. So to start us off for our first use case presentation, we have Tony Bozzi. Tony is a Presidential Management Fellow and Interagency Program Manager for the National Artificial Intelligence Institute of the Department of Veterans Affairs. And today, Tony will be presenting on Aspire, also known as the All Services Personnel and Instructional Readiness Engine. So without any further ado, Tony.
Sure. Hello. Okay, so as mentioned, I'm here to talk to you today about Aspire. Aspire is the thing that has stood up at the Department of Veterans Affairs purely incidentally. We were the first one past the post, the first one to claim ownership, but it is going to be a government-wide system. It is currently being developed by multi-agency efforts. So as it says, ASPIRE stands for All Services Personnel Institutional Readiness Engine. This is what ASPIRE is going to look like when it's all said and done. So the system will assist with recruitment, will assist with the assessment of potential recruits or current employees, pick your poison. It will then educate those individuals in a very specialized, bespoke way. Excuse me, more on that in a second. And in some cases, certify that knowledge when an agency is so interested. And will support in so doing career transitions, which I'll discuss, and national security incidentally. So this is the main functional loop of ASPIRE. So we assess those individuals like I mentioned. We're going to assess them with a computer adaptive assessment. So the test will be learning as it goes to be very specific and zoning into what the individual does and does not know. There will be gap analysis performed. That gap will be against what an individual should know based on their specific rate and role for their specific agency. So I in the VA doing AI acquisitions need to know a slightly different set of things than somebody in the Air Force doing AI acquisitions. And either of us need to know a largely similar but different set of things than somebody doing, say, hard property acquisition, right? And none of us need to know exactly the same stuff as researchers. They need to know a lot more of, say, the AI and a lot less of, say, what FedRAMP means. So we will find gaps specific to what you actually need, educate you then only on the stuff that you actually missed, right? The idea is to stop sending people to massive amounts of training that they don't actually need. Nobody cares, nobody pays attention. It is frustrating. It is frustrating to take stuff a lot of times. It is frustrating to be told you forgot something that you didn't. Also, admittedly, it's frustrating to be told that you remember something that you don't, right? We will have people that will go into positions because they say they know something that they learned in school 20 years ago, and they will think and it will hurt us. So we need to fix all those directions, right? Under and over. Then, obviously, while we're in the business of educating people, there will be descriptions of what they do and do not know, aggregated descriptions of what teams do and do not know, aggregating descriptions of what agencies do and do not know and cannot do, which will help successively higher levels of administrative professionals better prioritize things like educational funding, where they need to recruit to fill gaps, etc. And then, obviously, when all that's said and done, you are ready. Either you've educated your people, or you've replaced your people, or you've hired more people, whatever may be necessary. So where we are now is right here. We're very early on. Something we were doing in ASPIRE that I think is relatively important is we've decided to build almost the platonic form of each thing instead of just going out and finding the best extant version. So when we said we needed a computer adaptive assessment, we went out and said, what is a computer adaptive assessment? How do they work well? We worked back up from educational theory, back up from testing theory to try to figure out where current computer adaptive assessments succeed and fail. We were going to do the same thing with our common data model, the same thing with our software bill of materials. And then eventually we're going to put these things together, and I need to get an assessment first. There's reasons why we do an assessment first. I won't waste time on that here today, but assessment is the first goal. I'll talk a little bit more about the common data model going on. This is the only time I mention an SBOM, so for those that don't know, an SBOM is a software bill of materials. You can also have a SysBOM, which is a system bill of materials. These things trace back the origin of the code and the people who made those codes and the money that went to fund those codes to make sure that you don't have unanticipated backdoor vulnerabilities or other sorts of issues. The SysBOMs that we are using are extremely intensive. They go all the way back to the binary and work back up to see if there's binary indications of misbehavior in the code. Extremely secure. After we have our consistent security and our consistent common data model, we'll begin to develop the other pieces of our system, right? I said I'm going to start with assessments. The reason we start with assessments, like I said, there are numerous, but the first and foremost is we're starting with assessing VHA ORD researchers who are working in AI. Because we have a medical obligation, we want to be very, very sure that we're meeting our obligations to patients, that the people who are using AI are using it accurately. So we want to make sure first that we're not doing unanticipated, unnecessary risk. Then we'll start to fill the gaps. That said, there are other agencies that have come online, like I said, that are supporting, that are more interested in other pieces, and they may build them first. The Air Force, for instance, thinks they want to build a learning development system first. So chances are, and the hope is, that ASPIRE will come together in parallel instead of in series, and will get done faster than you might anticipate, like I said, 22 to 24. And at the point of 22 to 24, we should be able to have a learning development system that functions and start to be able to do personnel management functions. So a big thing of today's talk has been interoperability, right? We all need to be able to have systems that talk to each other. We don't want to redo work. We want to make sure that we can do secure and fluid transition of people and information across agencies, particularly for the VA across the DoD-VA line. So there are a number of things that go into the thought behind ASPIRE that are focused particularly and specifically on the interoperability among agencies and within an agency. So let's take, for example, consistent predications, right? I don't know if all of your companies and agencies are like this, but within the VA, Pretty much every single VA has different position descriptions that are written pretty much differently for people that have functionally the same job. We use different language, we have different levels of requirement. There'd be virtually no way to make them consistent in any way, shape, or form. But in a world post-Aspire, not only through the functions of Aspire, but because of the consistency that Aspire will give, we'll be able to start streamlining based on how Aspire is describing competencies. We can work back up and make consistent position descriptions, for example. We also make sure consistent education, right? When somebody gets training in the VA, it's extremely different than the training they're going to, or generally is different than the training they'll get in most other agencies, even for very standard stuff, like Acquisitions 101 has little variances. The higher up you go, the more variances there are. So when somebody comes over and says, I am XYZ certified per the Air Force, maybe not, that means they're XYZ certified for the VA. Or perhaps the more convincing story, they leave the VA and then the Air Force is suspect that we didn't teach them enough. Right, so having a consistency of education will help again with those transitions. Same thing for validation, right? An Aspire validated person is an Aspire validated person no matter where they worked beforehand. Security, auditing will all be consistent, will all be very high level. Oopsie daisy. Aha. So personalization is extremely hard to scale, right? It's the idea of an individual is the fact that an individual is not a scaled entity. So it becomes extremely difficult, and a lot of people have said, perhaps unbelievable, that we'll be able to do personalized learning pathways at scale. The idea here is something that is recently patented out of the Navy. It's called chunk learning. Chunk learning, instead of developing curricula or competencies in the traditional way that we're used to, do everything from a very atomized position. So instead of trying to pretend Algebra 1 equals these 30 different things, it just cares very much about, like, here is how you do single variable factoring. Here is how you do multivariate addition. Here is how you do single variate multiplication, right? So then we know, oh, somebody needs to know, maybe they lack that because they need algebra for their job. Maybe they're way behind and they need calculus for their job. But if they aren't good at exponents, that doesn't mean that they're not good at geometry. It doesn't mean that they're not good at statistics. So sending them back through math training 101 or a massive math curriculum because we think they're not good enough in math doesn't make any sense. Right, so we'll be able to individualize to a given individual exactly the pieces that they don't need, be able to do it quickly and intelligently thanks to AI from this repository of reusable pieces, which is where the scale comes from. As more and more pieces are built by more and more agencies, and as we become aware of more and more things that are needed and they're dumped into the Aspire system, they're infinitely reusable with some updating and auditing, which can continually repurpose ad infinitum at a scalable level. This is the general idea of what a learning pathway might look like. This is an Air Force image. It's very FPS looking, first-person shooter looking. I don't know if the VA one will look the same. But this is sort of the idea of like these little bits. And these are actually kind of long. This is for the Air Force system called AVOLS, which does 15 to 30-minute lessons. Aspire is looking at 2 to 3-minute lessons. But this might be the specifics of the exact sort of things that you might need that another individual might not. But at the end of the day, you'll all get the same batch, right? And that's where the consistency of validation occurs. Other functions, as I mentioned, as I hinted at, we do want to support recruiting. And I want to think about recruiting in a way that we don't think about recruiting right now. Right now, generally speaking, both industry and government think of recruiting as a marketing exercise, right? You're putting out there, my product is a job. An individual in the ecosystem is supposed to want that job, they'll find the job, they'll apply to the job. But then when we do research on people, or when we do military engagements elsewise, we don't market to find where people are. We go find them. We do anthropological and sociological searches, and we tell you a lay of the land of where different people in different demographics who know and need different things are. Why we don't do that for recruitment? Zero idea. Aspire hopes to. I mentioned certifications and incentives, right? The VA, not terribly concerned with certifications. Contrastingly, OD&I is one of our stakeholders. OD&I really wants certifications. Just like if you are a state action agent and you go and you learn a new language, even if it's not a language relevant to your desk, they believe that makes you a better agent. Similarly, going and getting Aspire certification in statistical analysis, even if you're not a finance agent, still might make you a better agent. So we can track those things, certify those things, and maybe incentivize those things, okay? And then the last one is national security. 2 ways we do that. One is if we start knowing who knows what and where they are as they move through the system, then if they exit the system, be it to friendly shores or adversarial shores, we'll know what they know and know what they know when they left. We as a nation do a pretty darn good job of tracking pieces of data, and often, setting aside anything with Trump, we're usually pretty good at tracking physical pieces of paper, but we're not good at tracking what an individual knows in their skull. We can help change that. Also, there's some interest from those who work in international that maybe we strip off that assessment piece at the front, and maybe we stick in some maybe NLP function that combs the internet for resumes, or maybe we stick in some computer vision function, and then maybe now we can point Aspire at domestic companies or international actors and find their gaps, and then be able to exploit their gaps or inform them of those gaps so they can repair that in the case of a friendly. Right, again, not our principal functions, but things that Aspire can do with very little extra work. Just by the nature of how the system works and does what it does, it will be able to do a number of these things. So that's the very quick and dirty overview. I'll take one more minute just to tell you again where we are right now. We are in a research stage. We have a tech sprint coming up. The tech sprint starts tomorrow. The tech sprint will be done in December. After the tech sprint is done, we will have a functional prototype demonstrator that will show you what it is to go from assessment to a personalized bespoke learning pathway. After that December deadline, we'll reach back out to industry to look for others who might be curious about supporting. I know it's been mentioned around here that we want things to be like competitive marketplaces. That is something Aspire is looking to do. Part of that common data model and consistent security means that anybody who wants to follow the data model and meet the security requirements can come make something for the system, which I think is an excellent thing. And the last part was, give back. Something that we'll make very clear is we're trying to develop this entirely as government-furnished equipment and government-created equipment because I want it to be public property because it's an educational system and I want to be able to give it back to community colleges and secondary schools that need it. So that is another thing that's very important to us when it comes to security, when it comes to give back, is making sure that it is public property because it is a public service, because I think we're all going to want it, right? We can all see the value inside and outside government. So that's all. Feel free to meet me afterward if you have any questions or comments. Hopefully you'll see Aspire rolling out in a couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Incredible presentation. And just as a follow-up to what he said, he will be around for the remainder of this summit to answer any questions or talk any further about his use case showcase. So following Tony is actually going to be a tag team. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Valerie Tran, who serves as a program manager within the Systems Transformation Division, Office of Enterprise Strategic Management of the General Services Administration's Federal Acquisition Services, and Michelle White, who serves as the Director of Services Contract Division 3, Interagency Contracts for the Office of IT Acquisition Operations and Information Technology category for the General Services Administration. So very short title there, so thank you. And so, yeah, without any further ado, I'd just like to welcome them on the stage.
Thank you so much. All right, I know we have a very little time and a lot to get through. More importantly, we really want to get through the demo today. So just to give you some context for our use case, to introduce Callie, the intent behind her was to help GSA contracting officers, really specifically to deal with an enormous time that they have to spend on administrative work to really look at proposals and compare it against compliance, and being able to get through the acquisition process, or more specifically through the source selection during procurement. And basically, how can we make that process more effective? How do we increase compliance? And ultimately, how do we get to a point where we can reduce some of those protests? So with that being said, Callie, just to give you some quick background and get to that demo, her full name is the Contract Acquisition Lifecycle Intelligence. She is an integrated tool within our contract writing system called COM, the Contract Acquisition Lifecycle Management System. We're not very, we tend to repeat ourselves a lot. As I mentioned, she is the application of AI or in machine learning to streamline the evaluation process and comparing vendor proposals against solicitations criteria. The 4 components that we have built her to look at is format, form, reps inserts, and requirements. In terms of how she was built, we have built it in partnership with Octo Consulting. It is offered as an infrastructure as a service, hosted in AWS, public cloud, East and West. We leverage Spacey and NLP, I'm sorry. How is she trained? We actually use a small sample set of solicitation and responses. We were hoping to show this to you today, but ultimately she will continue to grow using name entity recognition, and ultimately, as more information we provide her with to her, she will do a better job in helping us go through the evaluation. So with that being said, I'll just turn it over to Michelle, and she's going to log in and take us through what CALI would look like. So we're really excited about this tool. We're hoping that our contracting officers and acquisition workforce within FAST is as excited as we are.
Thank you so much. So our contract writing system has a basis of Prism. Prism sends over a copy of the solicitation and also copies of the proposals to our source selection component and to CALI. So this example that we have for you today is an RFP. As you can see, there are 2 responses to the specific RFP. So I'm going to go ahead and select the first one. So as Val said, there are 4 components to CALI. She looks at form compliance, format compliance, form compliance, reps and certs, and requirements. And as you can see, we have some graphics that will be available for you when you first log on. But let's go ahead and move to format compliance. So format compliance, the way CALI looks at this, she automatically identifies requirements as being compliant if they are 80% or higher in her estimations. Our first example of the non-compliance that requires a review is about font size. So you can see on the show preview, you can see in the solicitation where the solicitation required the font to be no less than 11 points. And down here, you can see that CALI found some areas in the solicitation here that the font was actually smaller than 11-point font. So in this area, you can identify whether the requirement was obeyed or not. I'm going to go ahead and click no. And then you can add some comments. I'm just going to put something here so that you can see that there are comments. And the same thing that you can do for items that are compliant. CALI doesn't make any decisions for the evaluators. However, they do have predictive scores. If the predictive scores, like I said before, 80% or higher, it does identify as green, but the evaluator can change that to not compliant. All right, back up to the top, I'm going to go to form compliance. So form compliance, we have an example of a 1449 for you today. And right here, we're looking at whether or not the contractor signed it. So how CALI does this is she counts the pixels. So we see that by the estimation, it looks like the box 30A was signed. Similarly, you have the name and title and also the date. For reps and certs, we do have, I'm just going to go ahead and just show you compliance on this one. This is the 52204-17, and the offer has identified that it does have an immediate owner. Just an example. And then the most exciting part, which is the requirements part. So this is your shall statements in a solicitation. What CALI is doing in this point is identifying all of the requirements that are listed in the contract or in the solicitation and comparing that to what is in the proposal. So this first requirement is the contractor shall develop and implement procedures to identify, prevent, and ensure non-recurrence of defective services. Well, here you can see that the predictive score is 15, which is bad. And this is the closest area that she was able to find in this particular proposal. What it is stating in the proposal is developing and updating as necessary change management procedures that cover how potential changes are identified. That obviously is not the same thing. You can actually view the proposal. We'll pull up the proposal and you can look through and see the actual content of the language of where that was located. With this, I will go ahead and identify that this vendor is not compliant. Did this meet the requirement? No, it did not. And I can put comments. I'm going to go ahead and just show you a compliant one so you can kind of get the idea. So here is a compliant one. With this one, the requirement is that the kickoff meeting shall occur no later than 5 days after contract award. So Kelly did find an 87% match, and it will occur no later than 5 days after the contract award. You can view the proposal and see if it validates that it is talking about the kickoff date. So once you've completed all of your reviews, you can go to this review tab, and on the side, on the left-hand screen, it will identify the total amount of elements that Kelly has reviewed. It'll identify the total amount of elements that it has predicted as being compliant. It will also identify in orange those that need to be reviewed and those that have been identified as invalid. Once all of the requirements for things needing review is complete, this button is grayed out. This is no longer grayed out, and you can submit this, and it will submit it back to our contract source selection component and be available for the source selection officials to complete their review of the proposals. And that concludes my demo.
Thank you very much, Valerie and Michelle. Similarly to with Tony, they will be around the rest of the summit to answer any further questions you might have about their use case. So finally, we actually have only one more. We have one more use case presentation to go through, and that will be with Robert Werman. So Robert is a program lead for shared services in the Office of Shared Solutions and Program Improvement at GSA, so the General Services Administration. So without further ado, Robert.
All right, thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be fairly quick about this. I think we've all been feeling like we're sort of drinking from the fire hose. Lots of great information this morning. So as was suggested, I'm Robert Werman. I work in the Office of Government-Wide Policy at GSA. In that capacity, I work on a team that engages with agencies and OMB and industry on where the opportunities are to help agencies do better with technology, particularly around their most common of functions. And I'm going to share my desktop here real quick. And the intention here is to give you guys an overview of an initiative that we have underway with a number of agency partners around essentially helping the actual business of government to operate and function better. So lots of great ways to leverage emerging technology in the mission space. But also wanted to put forward the idea and show you a couple of resources that are out there in terms of helping the actual operations and the management and administration of government function better. And so what's the so what behind that? Well, one of the so whats is that when you think about the fact that all of the agencies essentially need to perform these kinds of functions, it really starts to become, in some respects, a force multiplier for being able to fully exercise the work that you might be doing in emerging technologies, whether it's AI or IoT or blockchain or what have you. And so what you see here on this slide in front of you is an example of some of these areas that we're working with. So core financial management, there's currently over a $6 trillion a year federal budget. So all of the monies that are managed from one agency to the next and the technologies that are used to do that managing of the money, as well as the reporting and analytics, the travel needs of agencies, moving people from one place to another, the management of our workforce. There's over 2 million civilian workers across 120 federal agencies. There's a lot of technology that goes into their recruitment and their professional development over time, as well as real property management. The federal government has over 100,000 buildings, 640 million acres of land that it manages at total operating cost of $15 billion. Just to manage that entire footprint. There's obviously lots of technology that goes into there. There's lots of interest in helping buildings be more green and all of the sensors that may go into that type of work. And then as well, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's other areas like electronic records management, helping agencies do better with their digital records. And lastly, grants management. The federal government issues over $750 billion of grants to state and local governments every year. And so you begin to ask yourself, how can we help the government, and particularly through the use of emerging technologies, do better? So one of the principles that we have in shared services, particularly because these are all common functions, is to help the agency community get agreement on what its standard capabilities are and what the use cases are in each of these different areas. So we have a framework that we use for that. It's called the Federal Integrated Business Framework, and it includes all of the capabilities that agencies say they need in order to manage that $750 billion of grants, or that $6 trillion of federal budget, or the 2.1 million civilian workers that are out there in the ongoing recruitment and professional development of them. And so the neat thing about this framework is that there are agencies that are taking the lead in each of these areas. So for example, the Department of Treasury is taking the lead for financial management. As you might expect, CISA is taking the lead for the cybersecurity lifecycle. OPM is taking the lead for human capital, and GSA has the lead in a couple of areas as well, such as real property management and regulation management. NARA has the lead for electronic records management. And so all of these lead agencies are themselves working with their communities to pull together agreement on the most common capabilities, the use cases, the data standards in all of these areas. And they're doing it through this framework that we work with them on, which is basically the FIBF. And so what you might ask, so why could this be useful? So for number one of the reasons why we have the FIBF is to support agencies in the implementation of their procurements. So aside from leveraging a shared service, all of the capabilities and use cases and data elements that come out of this work are the types of things that agencies can use to accelerate their procurements, as well for those agencies that are thinking about things like RPA or wanting to do machine learning and are interested in what are the most common and most standard of data elements in the life cycle of what is essentially the business of government, this mission support area. You can turn to the FIBF to learn more about that. And so I'm very quickly going to show you where you can get to all of this information if you have an interest in it. And I'll expand my desktop here. And so I don't know if the slide decks will be shared or not, but there's a link in the slide deck to the FIBF website. And so basically, if you come to the site, you can get a list of the different functional areas that we're working with, and know that there are other areas that are also being explored. Final decisions haven't been made yet on adding them into the fold. But know that there's obviously other parts to the federal mission support lifecycle that we're working on. So basically on any given page, again, thinking about that $750 billion of grants that are dispersed to state and local agencies every year, that disbursement and the management of that and the understanding of the outcomes that result from that is all sort of articulated here in this life cycle. This is the grants management life cycle. And so if you come to the site, you can see the different parts of the life cycle. You can see the different capabilities, and you can search through them. For example, you can search for the word award, and it'll bring up any common agency capability that is needed in the grants life cycle that has the word award in it. And then there are actual use cases as well. So you see there's use cases related to research and development, grants to sovereign entities. And so I guess the reason why I would want to put this forward to you is that as you're thinking about, where are the best opportunity areas for me to exercise my emerging technology skills and sort of make some headway and do some good. So in addition to the mission space, there's also this idea of the mission support area, the sort of business of government and the operations of government. And so to that end, I'll sort of close to give you an awareness that we not only have this on our site, but we also make these standards available through a JSON feed. So if you are ever interested in being able to consume the capabilities or the data standards or the use cases, and to be able to repurpose them in any sort of apps that you have or any sort of databases that you have, we make them available through a JSON feed. So just as one example, I'm going to load this into jsonparser.org. Everything you saw on that other web page is also available as a JSON feed. And in fact, that web page consumes the JSON feed itself. So in this case, I'll do an open. And so you can see that everything that we have and all of the work that's being done by Treasury and the financial management community and the work that's being done by HHS and the grants management community to be able to sort of catalog the life cycle of each of these functional areas is also now available to you through a JSON feed to be consumed. And so I guess in closing, the thing that I would want you to take away from this is to know that is to know that when it comes to the opportunity to be able to sort of force multiply what you have to offer, to really think sincerely and seriously about what you might be able to do here in terms of the federal mission support lifecycle. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Rob. Hey, folks. So I want to take a moment to recognize and thank all the panelists and speakers who have joined us today. I want to also thank all of the folks who brought in their use cases, made posters, took the time out of their day to come in and share that with this fine group of folks. And if any use cases catch the eye of anyone who may be listening virtually, please reach out to our ACT-IAC leadership so that they may get in touch with you and share a little bit more with you. So we've spoken a lot about the NUSL today, the National Use Case and Solutions Library. We should probably tell you what it is. So a National Use Case and Solutions Library is an online, it's a digital library that is to be made searchable, shareable, and publicly available so that people can see what sort of emerging technologies are occurring in federal space, or maybe in industry, and so that people can effectively deduplicate any efforts or look for people who have already done the legwork to move forward. So you can go ahead and go to the next one, Jackie. So we're going to send you to the NUSL landing page. And as we scroll down here, I want to articulate a few key things about the NUSL. You know, the NUSL is initially, it is and was designed to accelerate the acquisition and adoption of emerging technologies by providing a checkpoint for agencies to go through and connect with pilots and programs that have already been ideated and constructed. It's also designed to maintain information and data on emerging technology use cases and recommendations across government and industry. We're using it as a method to convene the emerging technology stakeholder community and to encourage continued development of emerging technologies so that they can continue to populate this library. And lastly, one of the things that we really hope to get out of this program is to streamline the policy and regulatory requirements into the process of submitting a use case to the NUSL so that agencies, when they're searching for potential solutions, they have a much more streamlined way to acquire or even inquire if that's what they choose to do. So this is the NUSL landing page. From here, you can choose to search the NUSL, submit a use case, provide feedback on the pilot, and you can also, if you haven't yet, create a NUSL account. So NUSL accounts are open to the public. They're free to create. And if you already have an account, you can log in. Can we log in? No? So we can't log in today. And but we can search. So we're going to search today. And one of the things that I get to share with you folks, in addition to the various filters we have available, is that everyone who has shared a use case in the library so far has the esteemed, illustrious, so far unique Founders Badge. Now you laugh, but keep something in mind. This is perpetual. It's not going away. So 10, 15 years from now, when people are looking back and they want to see which agencies pioneered and trailblazed with ACT-IAC in the federal space, who participated, who spent the time, who spent the energy, who spent the efforts, and they get to see the green Founder Badge, which doesn't have a date, but I'm going to talk to Nancy about that. Maybe we can work something out. And they're going to see that Microsoft KPMG, the VA, SOCAT, and some others, GSA. Can you scroll down a little? Many others. So they've all participated, and they've all been a founder in this space. So I know what you may be thinking. Is it too late to submit a use case and get a founder's badge? That's a good question. Right now, it's not too late. But don't sleep on it. If you want to participate and you want to get your hat in this ring, all it takes is one use case, go to the Nussle, submit a use case, get your founder's badge, make it an NFT, put it on your LinkedIn profile, and tell them you got it from us. So the last thing I want to mention, what's that? We have to make sure we get it all in the same blockchain. So we'll take recommendations after. No favorites, right? No favorites are being announced right now. So the last thing I want to mention is, this is very exciting. So for those of you who may not know, we already released the National Use Case and Solutions Library white paper detailing the merits and suggestions for the federal government. Today I get to announce that we are going to be having another white paper construction. We are going to be forming a group this fall. And it is fall, so really any time now, if you'd like to participate. And we're going to be covering innovative approaches and tools for use case sharing. So we're really looking for folks in the federal space, industry space, academic space, who have done something similar to use case sharing. We wanted to discuss a common theme, right? We want to discuss platforms, we want to discuss programs, and the different methods that we can implement that may bring value to our efforts and to the federal space. So for that, please reach out to me at the email address here. And if you can't spell my last name, then come see me afterwards and I'll write it down for you. So thank you all very much. With that being said, I want to take this moment to stop talking on this microphone and introduce my good friend and our illustrious leader, Mr. Todd Hager.
Thank you, Josh. Really appreciate it. I'm not sure if my partner in crime is going to be up here or not, but Neil Chaudhry, are you out there anywhere? No. Okay. I guess I want to say thank you to everyone who helped pull this whole thing together. The emerging tech community is a great group of folks, and what we try to do is engage people kind of where they are. So we've got a regular monthly meeting that we do with emerging tech, like you're in today. But where we really get a lot of the work done, as you heard about from the Nussle and some of the other things that you've seen up here on the screen, is in our working groups. And those groups meet either weekly or bi-weekly as well. And we have a variety of them. We just added an 8th one with Quantum. So if you have any interest in that, please go to our page in ACT-IAC, Emerging Tech. There are a whole series of working groups in there too. And you can find a place that's good for you. And if not, you can always come to me or to Neil, who's in the back of the room there, waving big and pretty. And we'll get you connected with the right folks out there as well too. So thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. And I do want to just give a few shout outs to folks too. First of all, Neil, thank you for hosting us here in GSA. I thought this worked out really well. Hopefully it was good for the folks online as well too. I thought it really worked well within the auditorium, and I think we'll use this place again. Thank you. And then also, I want to thank the folks from the AI working group, which were largely involved in putting this whole thing together. In addition to Jackie, we have Josh, you met just a few moments ago, and talked about the Nussle and so forth too, who helps lead our AI working group. We've got Keith, I think, on the line out there from Ohio, and Fred in the back of the room, who has been a partner with us for about 8 years now too. So thank you, Fred. Again, another big shout out to Jackie, who really pulled this whole thing together, and she is amazing. I'll just say it, again. But now I have the distinct honor of introducing our last speaker. And she really doesn't need an introduction. And, and she, like Cher, goes by one name, Soraya. There she is. So Soraya, in addition to being the CEO of her own company right now, also led the DHS as a chief procurement officer, over 1,500 people, over 25 billion per year. She's also a fellow at the National Academy of Public Administration. She's a senior advisor for ACT-IAC. Thank you very much for your service. She is also on the board of advisors for the National Contract Management Association. So, Soraya, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Just the fact that you're here tells us that we're going to be doing much more sharing and learning, and that's what this is all about. The NUSSL is all about sharing the learning. And when I talk about the learning, I want to emphasize something. Every project doesn't have to be perfect to go into the NUSSL. Every project didn't have to be 100% successful. We learn also from what didn't go well. So it's extremely important that you think about that when you think about the NUSSL and the ability of sharing information. The Executive Order 13960 that you heard of today quite a bit created the requirement to share the non-sensitive artificial intelligence use cases with the public and private sectors. Why is that important? Well, in today's market, you heard from some of our panelists, we don't have the time and we don't have the money to keep up with our enemies. Think about that for a moment. We don't have the time and we don't have the money. Our requirements are urgent. The enemy out there, the people that seek to do us harm, they don't comply with FAR. They don't comply with federal acquisition regulations. There is no IG or GAO looking over their shoulder, and they certainly don't have a Congress or a president issuing executive orders. They're doing, and we have to be able to get ahead of them, not keep up with them, get ahead of them. So it's extremely important that we share. Why? Because what we do across government is very similar. Think about it. The functions that we serve in the federal government and even in state and local, they're very similar. So there is no reason why we can't share and learn from one another and adapt our capabilities. And industry is a huge player in this part. Industry is doing this throughout the world. If you think about what industry does, they not only serve themselves, but they serve one another, and we can learn much from industry. I thought it was interesting today that Dr. Liu brought up bringing in venture capitalists to participate in this game. Because again, the federal government can't subsidize everything itself. So I think it's extremely important that we learn from today. But what were some key words that you heard today? What are some of the things, the themes that you heard? You heard about relationships and collaboration. It is about learning from one another. Polly Hall gave the example, something that's very near and dear to my heart, of CPARs. How we take that past performance data and use it more effectively across government. We didn't do that by ourselves at DHS. We brought in a configuration of multiple agencies, large and small, to be a part of that partnership. These partnerships matter. We brought in industry. We also brought in academia, because academia has been assisting that project. So very excited about the work that they're doing there at DHS. You heard about VA Aspire. There's an example of something that we can do so much smarter, so much better, and so much more efficiently. And I'm sure that they're teaming with other agencies to work on that. And then last but not least, I want to talk about the concept of compliance being built in. I am a huge advocate of starting with a plan. Get everybody at the table at the very beginning. Every partner, every member of the team matters. And if you bring them to the table early, you will build compliance into your solution. You cannot build compliance afterwards. You're going to get yourself in trouble, whether it's security or privacy. I think Anil was the one who brought up privacy, or the lawyers, you name them. Make those your friends very early in the process, and let's carry them through. Last but not least, I want to talk about ACT-IAC a little bit, and organizations like ACT-IAC that bring industry and government together to think about real-time solutions, to create those networking opportunities and those partnerships to learn from one another. Sometimes by just coming to a forum like this, you're going to meet other federal agency partners that are doing things that are similar to you. Today, when you go out and look at the showcase of use cases out here, you're going to learn about what other agencies are doing. And not every use case is going to apply to your agency, but there's some element of what they did that might apply to something you're thinking about. So take advantage of these events. I want to thank the Emerging Technology COI for inviting me, the Community of Interest for inviting me. I actually participate on a couple of the working groups because as a senior advisor, I get to stick my nose in all the different projects, which is what I love to do. And I just love the learning. I love the learning and the ability to continue to support government, to continue to help our federal government be better and stronger, to make it better and faster. I think Polly said that, right? Better and faster. That's what we're trying to do, but we cannot sacrifice quality for speed, and we cannot sacrifice speed for quality. So we have to figure out a way to get both done efficiently and effectively. So please visit our website. Please go and look at the NUSL. Folks have been working on that for quite some time. I'm very excited at the possibility that it brings, that we can share that learning, that we can all learn from one another. So thank you all for everything that you do every single day. I want to thank our audience online for participating today. I know sometimes when you're participating online, it can be a little difficult because sometimes it's hard to hear and stuff, but I certainly appreciate their time, their energy, their effort. And I want to thank everyone that's here in the room, and I want to thank all the folks that brought in use cases to share with us today, because I think it's extremely important. I look forward to seeing you at future events. Take care and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Soraya. And sorry, not to beat an additional dead horse multiple more times, an additional thank you, but I just wanted to give one more closing thank you of gratitude to everybody who showed up here today. In the various capacities that you all contributed, it is very, very inspiring from our perspective to see so many people willing to contribute to this use case summit, whether it's presenting posters, whether it's having your panel present, or just being here in attendance. I appreciate all of your attendance here, both in person and electronically. And as Josh had mentioned earlier, for those of you who are here virtually, we really do encourage any networking or communication opportunities that you would like to pursue. Please reach out to ACT-IAC, and then from there we can further connect you and kind of connect those dots for use case implementation. And yes, just from here, I guess we cut you all loose to our use case showcase, and I encourage you all to look at all the posters, meet as many people as you can, and network. And again, just one last thank you very, very much for all of you for turning out. Look forward to seeing you all at the next ACT-IAC conference that we have. So thank you again.